A single sword cuts through silence in Edo Castle's grand hall. A gasp echoes off lacquered pillars. One man falls, another stands unbowed. Tonight. You witness how a single strike of impulsive rage ignited 7 years of sworn vengeance. Edo's golden peace and the code of Bushido in the early 18th century. Japan lay beneath the iron yet orderly rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, the nation, once torn apart by endless bloodshed. Now exhaled after centuries of war, to centuries of civil war had ended at Sekigahara. Now peace reigned from Hokkaido to Kyushu. Yet this peace was not gentle, it was firm, absolute, and unyielding. Edo modern Tokyo had blossomed from a humble fishing village into a city of 1,000,000 souls. Its streets alive with voices, its heart beating under the weight of history. At the heart of the city stood the shogun's castle, turrets gleaming, white against cedar wood walls, moats filled with carp gliding silently beneath the surface, bridges arching gracefully over waters veiled in morning mist. Samurai in polished armor paced the ramparts with measured steps. Their curved swords symbols of rank and honor glinted beneath banners bearing the Tokugawa crest, fluttering like solemn reminders of both duty and power. Yet for all this serenity, a rigid social order weighed heavily on every subject. A silent chain felt more deeply than seen. Farmers tilled rice paddies under heavy tribute, their backs bent beneath both sun and tax. Artisans crafted lacquerware and silk under strict guild regulations, their hands skillful yet bound by rules they dared not break. Merchants amassed wealth but remained low in status, their fortunes heavy in the purse but light in respect. Samurai alone bore the privilege of the sword and with it, the crushing burden of unyielding loyalty. Central to samurai life was Bushido, the way of the warrior. It was more than a code. It was a soul-binding oath. It demanded absolute obedience to one's lord, personal bravery that left no room for hesitation, and the willingness to die unflinchingly rather than live in shame. A lord's honor was a samurai's honor. Any stain on one's master demanded action, no matter the cost, even if that cost was life itself. Two lords, one collision of pride into this world of ceremony arrived Asano Naganori, the 29-year-old daimyo of Ak, tall and slender. He carried himself with calm dignity, every step measured as though the weight of his ancestors walked beside him. Raised on tales of Minamoto no Yoshitsune's exploits, Asano believed in justice tempered by compassion. His family's modest domain in Harima province stood in contrast to the grand fiefs of his peers, but Asano wore his humility like a second layer of armor. Proud to serve with honor rather than splendor, assigned to Edo for an audience with the shogun, Asano needed a guide through the suffocating maze of court etiquette. That role fell to Kira Yoshinaka, a senior official whose name carried both fear and resentment through the halls. Kira, older by decades, resided in a lavish mansion near the castle's north gate, his life draped in luxury. He wore brocaded robes the color of autumn leaves, their threads shimmering under candlelight, and he reputedly kept for a dozen sword-bearers at his beck and call, as if daring the world to challenge his authority. From the moment they met, friction crackled between them like steel striking flint. Asano, earnest and direct, expected courtesy. Kira, worldly and cynical, saw only weakness in Asano's deference. At their first lesson how to bow before the shogun, Kira's words fell like stones, not guidance. Asano's bow, deep and steady, was dismissed as too stiff. His sash knot, carefully tied, was scorned as crooked, an unforgivable insult in a hall where every gesture carried the weight of a clan's honor. On the third morning, Kira's temper broke loose like a whip. In the echoing hall, his voice rang sharp. "Lord Asano, do you intend to dance on your knees, align your spine, or spare me the theatre?" A ripple of suppressed laughter passed among the watching retainers, sharp as a blade to Asano's pride. His jaw tightened, and though his face remained calm, his heart pounded against his ribs. Each beat a drum of rising fury. Still, he bowed. Again, swallowing the fire that clawed at his throat. The blow that echoed through ages, the decisive moment came with the chill breath of a pale spring dawn. Shugan Tokugawa Itsuna had summoned both men to the main audience chamber vest, whole painted with gold, its lacquered columns gleaming like sunlit armor. Outside, courtiers in silken layers drifted like living brushstrokes. Waiting for the ceremony's start, trumpets rested silent, their bronze mouths poised for honor yet unblown. Asano stepped forward, his sandals brushing the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of incense and steel. He approached Kira's dais, bowing so deeply that his helmet nearly grazed the ground. The hall fell into hushed stillness. Kira, seated in self-assured ease, tapped his fan against his thigh, eyes glinting with disdain. His lips curved into a mocking smile. "Your bow," he sneered, an actor's flourish. "You dishonor this hall with clumsy grace." The words sliced through the chamber. A murmur stirred the courtiers. A ripple of scandal whispered behind painted sleeves. Asano's face burned crimson, his breath coming faster, heat flooding his veins. In the soul of a samurai, public humiliation burned deeper than any wound. And in that moment, decades of insult and condescension coiled into a single, white-hot fury. Before any guard could step forward, Asano's hand flashed to the hilt of his wakizashi. Steel whispered from its sheath, the blade short but glinting, with a cold light that seemed to awaken the hull itself. With a fierce and hesitating strike, he brought it down. The blade cleft Kira's hat, grazing his temple. A bead of crimson welled, then spilled, blooming dark against the silk. Kira staggered. Stunned, gasps tore from every throat. Courtiers screamed, silk robes fluttering like startled doves. Samurai surged toward Asano. But for a heartbeat, time itself seemed to freeze. Asano stood tall, his sword arm trembling yet unyielding, eyes blazing, like coals in a storm. In that charged silence, every heart in Edo thundered with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Seppuku and the birth of the Rōnin. Asano's act breached the most sacred of rules. To shed blood in the Shugan's presence was treason. The hall had barely stopped echoing with the scream of steel before retainers seized him. Their faces, hard as stone, bound in silence. He was led away, his eyes steady even as whispers of doom chased his steps through the corridors of Edo Castle. 2 hours later, beneath the fading glow of the setting sun, a white-robed procession carried him to a small terrace near the castle walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and the mournful cry of distant temple bells. There, before a circle of grim-faced daimyo, Asano prepared to meet death with the calm resolve of a warrior. He knelt upon the tatami. A hush fell like a shroud. Slowly, reverently, he placed his wakizashi blade across his outstretched left arm. The steel glimmered, a cruel reminder that this was both punishment and passage. With one composed exhalation so steady it seemed to carry away all fear, he drove the blade inward. Gasps rose from the onlookers, but no one moved. Guards watched, stoic and unblinking. As crimson stained his white robes, Asano slumped forward, his body yielding even as his spirit rose unbroken, leaving behind a final dignity no sentence could strip away. Yet his death carried one last cruelty. The Shugan's decree demanded the confiscation of his lands and titles. The Proudback domain was shattered overnight. Villages fell into disarray. Merchants shuttered their shops in mourning. Children wept behind paper screens as the news spread. And Asano's loyal retainers, men who had served him with unshakable devotion, were cast adrift. No longer bound by master, they bore the bitter name of Rōnin, masterless samurai. Among them stood Ōishi Kuranosuke, Asano's chief counselor and most trusted captain. His sword belt slipped from his waist as if in mourning. His kimono, caught by the evening breeze, billowed round a body heavy with grief. He did not weep, for a samurai did not weep. But the weight in his eyes spoke of a sorrow deeper than tears. Beneath that silence, a vow took root like iron in his chest. The Lord's dishonor would not stand. Exile and the seed of vengeance in the weeks that followed. The 47 Rōnin scattered like autumn leaves across the country. Some found work as bodyguards for minor clans, their swords hired but their pride hollow. Others drifted through Osaka's gambling dens or the merchant quarters of Kyoto, trying to drown their shame in dice and drink. Ōishi himself chose the most dangerous disguise of all. He feigned madness. By day, he stumbled through tea-houses, laughing too loudly, spilling sake across the tatami. He insulted passing samurai, mocked his own cowardice, and staggered home reeking of drink. To the eyes of Edo, he was no longer a warrior, just a broken man who had surrendered to disgrace. But behind closed doors, the mask fell. Each night, in secret, his mind sharpened like a whetstone. Letters passed in silence, folded strips of paper sealed with vermilion wax, carrying words of loyalty as sacred as prayers. Some bore nothing but the inked silhouette of a drawn sword, a message clearer than any poem. Dishonor pressed on them like a suffocating weight. To live without a lord was to carry shame with every breath, yet the oath burned brighter, too. Avenge Asano's forced death was the only path back to honor. Ishii's madness became his greatest camouflage. While the world mocked him as a drunken fool, he moved like a shadow, gathering whispers, securing blades, and planning every step of the storm to come. On the 7th anniversary of Asano's seppuku, November 14, 1703, the waiting ended. From Kyoto to Edo, secret runners carried folded slips of paper, each bearing a single phrase. The hour of vengeance approaches. The ink was simple, but to the 47 Rōnin, it was the sound of destiny knocking. Hidden oaths and secret alliances, 7 years of cunning disguise for 7 long years. Ōishi and his 46 comrades cloaked their true purpose behind the tattered masks of broken men. Every sunrise was a performance, every night a quiet rehearsal for a vengeance. Their days became an intricate dance of deception, each step designed to lull the world into believing they had surrendered to disgrace. Ōishi Kuranosuke, once the dignified chamberlain of Ak, now staggered through Kyoto's lowliest tea-houses. Patrons sneered at his slurred boasts of cowardice, dismissing him as a fallen lord who had traded his honor for sake cups and smoke. They never guessed that beneath his disheveled kimono and glassy eyes burned a will of steel, unyielding, patient, waiting. In rural Shinono, Keinon now transformed into a humble innkeeper. He welcomed traveling samurai with the soft courtesy of a servant, all while quietly sketching guard rotations round Edo in the solitude of night. His maps, hidden in coded letters, crossed mountain passes in the hands of trusted couriers. Harem Yosabe, who the world now saw as nothing more than a struggling sword salesman in Osaka, handled every blade with the care of a craftsman, but each test cut, each balanced hilt, became part of a living memory. At night, by candlelight, he redrew the layouts of Edo's barracks and guard towers from recollection, crafting blueprints from nothing but sheer discipline. And yet, their courage was not theirs alone. Quiet allies emerged. Buddhist monks at Sengaku-ji temple, moved by the tears of axe-widowed women, agreed to shelter the Rōnin's secret messages. Some merchants of Edo, still grateful for Asano's fairness in trade, risked their own fortunes to provide what the shogunate would never allow: scaling poles hidden in crates of bamboo, lantern oil disguised as temple offerings, and bolts of black-dyed cloaks passed off as winter stock. These were not gestures of rebellion, but of faith. each act of help, each whispered prayer, wove together into a web strong enough to defy the might of the Tokugawa watchmen. Still, joy was scarce. Each sunset they swallowed their bitterness, the ache of dishonor settling into their bones. Each sunrise they steeled their hearts anew, whispering the same vow. The day of vengeance was coming. Slow as grinding millstones, but certain as the dawn. The colors of conspiracy in the seventh winter after Asano's death. The Rōnin chose November 14th as their day of reckoning, the anniversary of their lord's seppuku. To the world, it was a date like any other. To them, it was destiny. 7 years marked the full measure of a samurai's vow. November's frost breathed the chill of death itself. And the 14th day echoed the trapdoor that had swallowed their master into disgrace. To prepare, they wove their final plans in symbols that spoke louder than words. The red camellia, Asano's emblem, pressed into letters and placed on lanterns. Its bloom signaled all clear or hold. A silent code carried through the streets of Edo. The white crane feather, delicate but enduring, threaded through the collars of trusted allies. To see it was to know a safe house waited, a cache of weapons hidden in shadow, and the black cloaks, dyed in secrecy by Osaka merchants, bundled and distributed quietly. To the common eye, they were winter garments, but to the 47, they were armor for the night shadows woven into cloth. By the banks of Otaka Hill, whispers told of ghost men, servants, stable hands, and vendors spoke softly of figures who moved in the alleys at dusk, carrying bamboo tubes filled with salted rice and sake. These supplies, stashed in silence, would keep the warriors strong for other days to come. The final convergence on the evening of November 13, 1703. The snow fell soft and unbroken, covering the Otaka road in a quiet shroud. Beneath a modest wooden sign that read Matsumoto's, 46 of the Rōnin gathered in a low-ceilinged room lit by the glow of a single lantern. Years of hardship had carved lines into their faces. But in the wavering light, they did not look weary, they looked resolved. Ōishi entered last. In his hands he carried a lacquer box. Within lay Asano's wakizashi, the very blade with which their lord had met his end, and a folded slip of paper that bore their final plan. He placed it before them and spoke, his voice calm but firm, echoing in the silence. Brothers, tomorrow night our blades will restore our lord's honor. Stand firm in heart, swift in action, and united in vow. The plan was simple, yet written in steel. Divide into 9 squads, 5 or 6 men each, to breach 9 points of Kira's mansion. Signal the attack with red camellia placed on the eastern gate's latch. Strike swiftly. Be gone before the city guards arrive. By dawn, place Kira's head upon Asano's tomb at Sengaku-ji. Then surrender, with honor, at the temple gates. One by one, each man clasped Ōishi's hand. They drank from a single shared cup of sake, the warmth spreading through their veins like fire. The lantern's steam rose with their breath, mingling into one vow silent, unbreakable, stronger than steel. Rest before the storm, the conspirators slipped into the snow, vanishing into the hush of Edo's streets, in doorways and behind fences. Pairs of men whispered their final codes. Red camellia on latch raised the inner gates. White crane at collar fuse pots clear. Black cloak ready advance with silence. Ōishi and his closest men walked the route one last time. Each stone and hinge pressed into memory. By midnight, the city lay silent under a blanket of snow. Lanterns burned low in the castle towers, their light dimmed as if even Edo itself had chosen to look away. The air was so still, it seemed the world was holding its breath. And beneath that breathless peace, the ghosts of waited 47 shadows ready to strike. The web of silence as dawn neared on November 14th. The city of Edo lay beneath a fresh shroud of snow. Lanterns winked out one by one, leaving the streets swallowed by darkness, broken only by the distant toll of a temple bell marking the passage of hours for the 47 Rōnin. This was the hour of greatest tension, the breathless stillness before storm. The air was thin and frigid, every inhalation crackling with the weight of silent anticipation. In the narrow alleys behind Otoka Hill, they gathered in small groups of 5. Each man's breath rose in pale clouds that glimmered in the lantern glow. No words passed, only nods and steady gazes that spoke the unspoken. Ōishi moved among them. His face calm, though his heart thundered beneath his robes. He offered a final whisper, soft as falling snow. Remember, our blades serve our Lord's spirit. Strike swiftly, then bow to the dawn. With no further sound, the squads dissolved into the night, their black cloaks merged with wood and stone, their shadows gliding like spirits. Only the soft crunch of leather soles and the faint creak of bamboo ladders betrayed their presence. Scaling Kira's walls, 8 squads moved unseen, gliding through alleys until the towering outline of Kira's mansion loomed ahead. The first barrier rose before them, a wood-owned palisade 10 feet high, dark with frost. Now, the scout knelt and pressed a hand to its grain, testing for a weakness. With a silent nod, he planted a bamboo pole against the wall. 2 men ascended. Swiftly, the moonlight flashing against their iron hooks as they tossed them over the railing. The grappling hooks caught fast with a dull scrape. Moments later, one by one, 5 Rōnin scaled the wall and dropped down softly onto the snow-dusted ground inside. Just beyond, 3 guards dozed between watch posts, their breath hairy with wine. Harabiyosabe stepped forward, blade drawn but angled for silence. He pressed a hand over one sentry's mouth, striking swiftly with the flat of his sword. The man crumpled soundlessly, alive but unmoving. Mercy was no weakness tonight, it was precision. This was not slaughter, but justice. The eastern gate breached, the squads converged at their appointed places, moving as one body guided by a single will. At the eastern gate, a red camellia, its petals bright even in the night, rested delicately on the latch. The signal was set. Ōishi himself placed the final bloom, his eyes briefly closing in reverence. With a silent nod, the gate was forced open. Snowflakes drifted inside, shimmering in the faint glow of lanterns from the inner courtyard. Rice paper screens lined the corridors, glowing like pale moons against the dark. Inside, servants stirred, startled awake by the faint clatter of steel against stone. But before any cry could rise, Ōishi's squad swept forward, blades gleaming, movements fluid and soundless. The attack moved like a winter wave, swift, cold, and unstoppable. Storming the inner court, in the heart of the mansion loomed Kira's treasure house, a lacquered pavilion filled with silks, scrolls, and artifacts stolen from Asano's domain. The Rōnin paused only long enough to confirm the direction of Kira's chambers beyond. Then, with a sudden burst, they crashed through the sliding doors. 8 guards rose to meet them, spears raised, voices breaking the silence with sudden cries. Steel clashed in the flicker of lantern light. Katon met spear in furious arcs, snow spattered red with each strike. The Rōnin fought with a precision born of 7 years' restraint. Each cut was clean, deliberate, final. No man faltered, no blade wavered. Within moments, the guards lay defeated upon the crimson-stained mats. The Rōnin pressed onward, their breaths ragged, their eyes fixed on the door beyond. The confrontation with Kira at last. They reached Kira's chamber. Lanterns flickered by a low hearth, casting trembling shadows across the tatami. There, Kira Yushinaka sat hunched over a low table, brush in hand, composing a letter. He looked up at the sound of the door sliding open, his face draining of color. As he saw the figure framed in the doorway, Ōishi stepped inside, every movement deliberate, his expression unreadable. Asano's wakizashi gleamed in his hand, the polished steel reflecting the firelight in cold flashes. He bowed deeply, voice steady, carrying the weight of 7 years of silence. "My lord demands justice." Before Kira could rise, the blade swept in a single and hesitating arc. The steel found its mark. Kira collapsed forward, crimson spreading swiftly across the tatami. The room fell into stillness broken only by the crackle of the hearth. The Rōnin stood in silence, their mission fulfilled, the oath complete, retreat into legend without a word. They wrapped Kira's head in white linen, the fabric blooming red as it absorbed the last of his life. They retraced their path through corridors heavy with silence, past the fallen gods, over the walls, and down bamboo ladders into the snow-dusted courtyard beyond dot outside. The first grey light of dawn brushed the rooftops of Edo. The city lay, unaware that history had just been carved into its heart. The 47 Rōnin formed into a solemn procession, their footsteps steady, their faces calm. They carried their burden with reverence. Marching towards Sengaku-ji temple, there, upon the tomb of Asano Naganori, they would place the head of Kira Yoshinaka. The world would call them traitors, rebels, or heroes, but in that moment, they were only samurai men who had chosen honor over life, vengeance over peace, and silence over shame. Their blades had spoken. Their vow was complete. Seppuku and everlasting legacy dawned at Sengaku-ji as pale sunlight filtered through the paper screens of Sengaku-ji temple. 47 shadowed figures appeared at its gates. Each wore a black cloak, each face calm yet marked with years of burden. In their hands they carried a single burden wrapped in pristine white cloth, the severed head of Lord Kira. Monks and pilgrims, gathered for morning prayers, fell silent. Their chants faded into hushed astonishment as the solemn procession crossed the temple threshold. Snow clung to their sandals, melting into rivulets along the stones. At the head walked Ōishi Kuranosuke. His eyes were steady, his steps measured, as though each carried the weight of his lord's soul. In the mist-shrouded courtyard, where a pine tree bent solemnly over the grave of Asano Naganori, he knelt with reverent care. He placed Kira's head upon the altar before the tomb. One by one, each Rōnin stepped forward, bowing until their foreheads touched the cold granite. Not a word broke the silence, only the whisper of wind through bamboo and the deep toll of a distant temple bell. The ritual of surrender when the last bow was complete. The men rose together, turning to face Abbot Shahaku and the shogunate, envoys who had gathered in quiet awe. Ōishi spoke, his voice clear and unwavering, carrying the weight of every fallen breath. "We are the former samurai of Ak. We have avenged our lord's wrongful death. We submit ourselves to your justice." The temple fell into stunned silence. These were no mere assassins. These were men who had defied the shogunate not for greed or hatred, but for loyalty greater than fear of death. Led by the abbot, the Rōnin entered the temple's main hall, one by one. They removed their katanas and laid them across the altar, unarmed and kneeling with backs straight. Without a cry of defiance, without a plea from mercy, they offered only silence, the silence of men who had fulfilled their vow. Ordered seppuku outside. Edo's garrison samurai formed to solemn lines along a gravel path, the slow, steady beat of a shinobi drum carried through the winter air. At its sound, Ōishi stepped forward first. On a silk mat, before a low wooden table, lay a ceremonial dagger, Asano's own wakizashi. Ōishi bowed deeply to the gathered men. Then, with steady breath, he pressed the blade into his left side. The motion was clean, decisive, filled with the same dignity he had carried through life. A hush fell as he slumped forward, his spirit finally at rest. One after another, the remaining 46 followed. Some exhaled sharply. Others closed their eyes in quiet relief. But none faltered. Their robes, once pure, slowly darkened with crimson, absorbing their sacrifice as gently as snow melting on stone. The earth itself seemed to weep with the soundless fall of winter flakes. The shogun's proclamation, when the last Rōnin lay still, a herald stepped forward, unfurling a scroll. He read the decree of Shogun Tokugawa Itsuna in a voice both stern and solemn. Though these men broke the laws of the realm, they displayed the highest form of loyalty a samurai can offer. By avenging their master, they preserved the true spirit of the warrior. Let their names be honored, and their graves tended until the end of time, in an act both merciful and extraordinary. The shogun granted burial for the 47 within Sengaku-ji itself. That evening, lanterns illuminated their procession. Side by side, their bodies were laid to rest, swords placed across their chests, as though they still stood guard over their master's grave. Bonfire nights silent echo that night. Edo did not roar with victory, it glowed with reverence. Candles burned in windows. Lanterns floated silently down riverbanks. Each flame was not celebration, but remembrance acquired vow to honor the 47 who had chosen death over dishonor. Far beyond Japan, their story traveled. Dutch traders in Nagasaki carried the tale to Europe, where scholars in London and Amsterdam whispered of the Night of the Sword. Across oceans and borders, people marvel that such loyalty could burn brighter than fear, outlasting even the law. The eternal shine centuries past. But Sengaku-ji did not fade into memory. It became a shrine of pilgrimage, a place where thousands came every November 14th to kneel before the graves. Offerings of rice cakes lay upon the stones. Red camellias bloomed against cold granite, recalling the signal that had marked the hour of vengeance. Candlelight vigil flickered through the night, each flame like the whisper of a blade, each prayer a tribute to honor. Woodblock artists captured the snowy raid in vivid detail. Kabuki stages resounded with Ōishi's voice. In the age of film, cameras turned the Night of the Rōnin into legend. Through brush, ink, and screen, their story endured, refusing to fade. Reflections on vengeance and justice. The tale of the 47 Rōnin reminds us that vengeance can walk a razor's edge between justice and destruction. These men risked everything not for bloodlust, but to restore their lord's honor, choosing loyalty and sacrifice over life itself. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, picture them, 47 figures standing in the pale moonlight of Sengaku-ji's courtyard, their blades silent, their vow fulfilled. 7 years of waiting, one night of reckoning, a legacy that will never die. Not if the story of the 47 Rōnin moved your spirit, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share which tale of honor and sacrifice you'd like to hear next. Until then, rest well, for history whispers even now, waiting for your dreams.